Hello everyone, Kenneth Morales here, and I will be discussing the semiconductor shortage through the presentation of two current events. The first current event discusses how Toyota and Volvo were affected by the semiconductor shortage that occurred due to the pandemic restrictions and outbreaks of 2020 and 2021. Both companies announced production decreasing by 6 to a quarter of former projections for the months of September and November of 2021. By this time, automobiles were in short supply while consumer demand was rising. The second current event discusses how Apple CEO Tim Cook admitted that the semiconductor shortage was affecting the supply chain and that the company would see a diminished projection in the sales target for 2022. Other companies mentioned were Volvo, Daimler, and Nokia, who also reported chain and supply issues due to semiconductor shortage. Concern was rising because recent lockdowns in China could further disrupt the chain of supply. A larger global issue demonstrated by these articles is the spread of economic globalization and how reliant the world has become on the technology that has allowed for this type of globalization. One of the main technologies responsible for the ease by which the world can be globalized is the internet. While the internet is used by billions of people throughout the world, additional billions of people remain unconnected, and those who benefit the most from economic globalization are the wealthy, for which the internet was built for in the first place. For example, organizations who rely on technology to bring technology to the less fortunate suffer in their operations with the semiconductor shortage running rampant. Children who relied on laptops for school could not attend classes due to shortages. For many people, the pandemic bringing on the shortage of semiconductors was an inconvenience, where they had to isolate and work from home. Others, who could not afford the inflated prices of the technology to get them to work from home, or even apply for a job, were often left homeless and downtrodden. An explanation of the global issue and current event could be found in the dependency theory. Relying on the core, periphery, and semi-periphery classification of the world's nations from the world systems theory, and as a response to modernization theory, the dependency theory explains how core nations exploit the poorer periphery and semi-periphery nations for profit. Through globalization, the periphery countries are integrated into the system as they are, and their ability to develop into a core country is impeded. When considering the semiconductor shortage, the majority, if not all, the tech companies suffer shortages. Periphery nations cannot supply core nations with the materials to build high-end technology, while companies cannot meet the demand in core nations and prices skyrocket. As the world becomes further digitalized, the need for semiconductors increases. However, even if production recovers and increases in volume, it is still difficult for those less fortunate to have access to this technology. However, experts in the field see the semiconductor shortage as being an acute issue rather than a chronic one. In the long run, as the world becomes more reliant on semiconductors, the flow of wealth will be reflected in the success of semiconductor market. For the future of semiconductors, globalization seems to be the most cost-effective way of producing this type of technology, with onshore costs to produce national semiconductors being projected at $1 trillion and taking up to a decade to produce. Globalization seems to be the way to go. It seems the United States is not worried about the cost and time it will take to establish a more hands-on approach to producing its own semiconductors. In fact, the global shortage of semiconductors has highlighted how much production has been allocated overseas. The goal is for the United States to have a bigger stake in the game, which will create more jobs and stabilize the nation's economy. The world systems theory explains how all the nations are connected during this shortage, where core nations such as the US and semi-periphery nations such as Taiwan have their roles to play in the economic globalization of semiconductors. Taiwan produces semiconductors for the US, who in turn use them in highly advanced technology and sell for healthy returns all over the world. The dependency theory fills the gaps and highlights how core nations exploit periphery and semi-periphery nations. The system established by the core nations is by design meant to keep periphery and semi-periphery nations in their places, otherwise it would disrupt the chain of supply. Core nations rely on the low cost it takes to produce important components for their advanced technologies. So while the core nations' wealth and influence continue to expand, the periphery and semi-periphery nations tend to stagnate, with little hope in developing into a core nation. The semiconductor shortage is not the only upheaval felt around the world during these tumultuous times, but it does affect everyone to some degree. Not only does it highlight how the globalization has created a dependency between nations, but also how globalization is exploited by the wealthy. The rich continue to get rich as the gap to the bottom continues to widen. Perhaps it is time for core nations to take responsibility for the issues they are causing by exploiting globalization. If we are to fill the gaps that globalization creates, it is imperative that the core nations have laws without loopholes, or lobbyists with congressmen and senators in their pockets. Companies who do expand offshore should be required to assist the nations they are working with in creating a sustainable production of endeavors unique to that nation. Hopefully, this initiative will bridge the gap between core, semi-periphery, and periphery nations.